Welcome back. Today we're going to be reading Chapter 1 from Joseph Campbell's Primitive Mythology, part of the Masks of God series. And I'm going to get right into it. Chapter 1, The Enigma of the Inherited Image. 1. The Innate Releasing Mechanism. A number of popular moving picture films have shown the amazing phenomenon of the laying and hatching of the eggs of the sea turtle. The female leaves the water and crawls to a point on the beach safely above the tide line, where she digs a hole, deposits hundreds of eggs, covers the nest, and turns back to the sea. After 18 days, a multitude of tiny turtles come flipping up through the sand and, like a field of sprinters at the crack of the gun, make for the heavily crashing waves as fast as they can, while gulls drop screaming from overhead to pick them off. No more vivid representation could be desired of spontaneity and the quest for the not yet seen. There is no question here of learning, trial and error, nor are the tiny things afraid of the great waves. They know that they must hurry, know how to do it, and know precisely where they are going. And finally, when they enter the sea, they know immediately both how to swim and that swim they must. Students of animal behavior have coined the term innate releasing mechanism to designate the inherited structure in the nervous system that enables an animal to respond thus to a circumstance never experienced before. And the factor triggering the response they term a sign stimulus or releaser. It is obvious that the living entity responding to such a sign cannot be said to be the individual, since the individual has had no previous knowledge of the object to which it is reacting. The recognizing and responding subject is rather some sort of trans or super individual inhabiting and moving the living creature. Let us not speculate here about the metaphysics of this mystery. For as Schopenhauer safely remarked in his paper on the will in nature, we are sunk in a sea of riddles and inscrutables, knowing and understanding neither what is around us nor ourselves. Chicks, with their eggshells still adhering to their tails, dart for cover when a hawk flies overhead, but not when the bird is a gull or duck, heron, or pigeon. Furthermore, if the wooden model of a hawk is drawn over their coop on a wire, they react as though it were alive, unless it be drawn backward, when there is no response. Here we have an extremely precise image, never seen before, yet recognized with reference not merely to its form, but to its form in motion, and linked furthermore to an immediate, unplanned, unlearned, and even unintended system of appropriate action, flight to cover. The image of the inherited enemy is already sleeping in the nervous system, and along with it the well-proven reaction. Furthermore, even if all the hawks in the world were to vanish, their image would still sleep in the soul of the chick, never to be roused, however, unless by some accident of art. For example, a repetition of the clever experiment of the wooden hawk on a wire. With that, for a certain number of generations at any rate, the obsolete reaction of the flight to cover would recur, and unless we knew about the earlier danger of hawks to chicks, we should find the sudden eruption difficult to explain. Whence, we might ask, this abrupt seizure by an image to which there is no counterpart in the chicken's world? Living gulls and ducks Herons and pigeons leave it cold, but the work of art strikes some very deep chord. Have we here a clue to the problem of the image of the witch in the nervous system of the child? Some psychologists would say so. C.G. Jung, for example, identifies two fundamentally different systems of unconsciously motivated response in the human being. One he terms the personal unconscious. It is based on a context of forgotten, neglected, or suppressed memory images derived from personal experience, infantile impressions, shocks, frustrations, satisfactions, etc., such as Sigmund Freud recognized and analyzed in his therapy. The other he names the collective unconscious. Its contents, which he calls archetypes, are just such images as that of the hawk in the nervous system of the chick. No one has yet been able to tell us how it got there, but there it is. A personal image, he writes, has neither archaic character nor collective significance, but expresses unconscious contents of a personal nature and a personally conditioned conscious inclination. The primary image, which I have termed archetype, is always collective, i.e., common to at least whole peoples or periods of history. The chief mythological motifs of all times and races are very probably of this order. For example, in the dreams and fantasies of neurotics of pure Negro stock, I have been able to identify a series of motifs of Greek mythology. The primary image, he then suggests, is a memory deposit, an engram, derived from a condensation of innumerable similar experiences, the psychic expression of an anatomically, physiologically determined natural tendency. Jung's idea of the archetypes is one of the leading theories today in the field of our subject. It is a development of the earlier theory of Adolf Bastian, 1826 to 1905, who recognized in the course of his extensive travels the uniformity of what he termed the elementary ideas, elementar Gedanke, of mankind, remarking also, however, that in the various provinces of human culture these ideas are differently articulated and elaborated. He coined the term ethnic ideas, Volkergedanke, for the actual local manifestations of the universal forms. Nowhere, he noted, are the elementary ideas to be found in a pure state, abstracted from the locally conditioned ethnic ideas, through which they are substantialized, but rather, like the image of man himself, they are to be known only by way of the rich variety of their extremely interesting, frequently startling, yet always finely recognizable inflections in the panorama of human life. Two possibilities of emphasis are implicit in this observation of Bastian. The first we may term the psychological, and the second the ethnological. And these can be taken to represent broadly the two contrasting points of view from which scientists, scholars, and philosophers have approached our subject. First, wrote Bastian, the idea as such must be studied, and as second factor, the influence of climatic geological conditions. Only after that, as a third factor, according to his view, could the influence upon one another of the various ethnic traditions throughout the course of history be profitably surveyed. Bastian, that is to say, stressed the psychological spontaneous aspect of culture as primary, and this approach has been the usual one of biologists, medical men, and psychologists to the present day. Briefly stated, it assumes that there is in the structure and function of the psyche a certain degree of spontaneity and consequent uniformity throughout the history and domain of the human species, an order of psychological laws inhering in the structure of the body, which has not radically altered since the period of the Aurignacian caves, and can be as readily identified in the jungles of Brazil as in the cafes of Paris, as readily in the igloos of Baffinland as in the harems of Marrakesh. But on the other hand, if climate, geography, and massive social forces are to be regarded as of more moment in the shaping of the ideas, ideals, fantasies, and emotions by which men live than the innate structures and capacities of the psyche, then a diametrically contrary philosophical position must be assumed. Psychology in this case becomes a function of ethnology, or, to quote one representative authority, A.R. Radcliffe Brown, in his work on the Andaman Islanders, a society depends for its existence on the presence in the minds of its members of a certain system of sentiments by which the conduct of the individual is regulated in conformity with the needs of the society. Every feature of the social system itself and every event or object that in any way affects the well-being or the cohesion of the society becomes an object of this system of sentiments. In human society, the sentiments in question are not innate, but are developed in the individual by the action of the society upon him. The ceremonial customs of a society are a means by which the sentiments in question are given collective expression on appropriate occasions. The ceremonial, that is collective, expression of any sentiment serves both to maintain it at the requisite degree of intensity in the mind of the individual and to transmit it from one generation to another. Without such expression, the sentiments involved could not exist. It will be readily seen that in such a view, the ceremonials and mythologies of the differing societies are in no sense manifestations of psychologically grounded elementary ideas, common to the human race, but of interests locally conditioned, and the fundamental contrast of the two approaches is surely clear. Was the little girl's reaction to the idea of the witch that she had conjured into her mind comparable to the chick's reaction to the fashioned image of a hawk? Or should we say, rather, that because she had been brought up on the fairy tales collected by the brothers Grimm, she had learned to associate certain imagined dangers with a German fictional character, and these alone were the cause of her fright? Before being satisfied we know the answer, we must consider seriously the now well-proven fact that the human nervous system was the governor, guide, and controller of a nomadic hunter foraging for his food and protecting himself and his family from becoming food in a very dangerous world of animals for the first 600,000 years of its development. Whereas it has been serving comparatively safe and sane farmers, merchants, professors, and their children for scarcely 8,000 years, a segment of less than 1.5% of the known arc. Who will claim to know what sign stimuli smote our releasing mechanisms when our names were not Homo sapiens but Pithecanthropus, or Plesioanthropus, or perhaps even millenniums earlier, Dryopithecus? And who that has knowledge of the numerous vestigial structures of our anatomy, surviving from the days when we were beasts, for example, the muscles of the caudal vertebra that once wagged our tail, would doubt that in the central nervous system comparable vestiges must remain? Images sleeping, whose releasers no longer appear in nature, but might occur in art? As N. Timbergen has so well advised in his introductory lectures on the study of instinct, since generalization based on too narrow a foundation tends to give rise to unnecessary controversy, special emphasis should be placed on the importance of a complete inventory of the behavior patterns of a species before conclusions are announced. For the problem of the relationship of innate to conditioned behavior is far from resolved even for animal species very much less complicated than our own. Nor can general laws be announced for the animal world that will necessarily be valid from one species to the next. And we'll stop there for now. Thanks again for joining me. Next time we'll pick up where we left off in Chapter 1, The Enigma of the Inherited Image.